Well, hi there. It's me, Penny, again. I got out of the house and I thought I would come over to one of my favorite spots. I call it my tree spot. And it's really not far from home. But I'll never forget the first time I stumbled on this little park when I first moved here a couple of years ago, right before the pandemic. And I was so struck by the trees, because they're just all sorts of different species of trees, and they are enormous, as you can see some of them behind me. It's quite special. So yeah, and today is Family Day here in Canada. I've been thinking about some things for what I wanted to share in an upcoming video, and I thought I would take this nice natural opportunity to just reflect on something that I've noticed over the course of teaching piano. There's a question that I've asked students in the past, and that is, and I've actually asked it to non-students, people at some various presentations that I've given, because in addition to performing, I do really love to research the history of pianists, and I've given some talks about that subject, both online and in person. And anyhow, sometimes I ask the question, when was the last time that a work of art moved you to tears? I ask this at lessons in particular, and sometimes bless their heart, but sometimes I get a look of actual astonishment from the student. Really? A work of art, a piece of music, could be so powerful that it moves you to tears? And I say, yes. Not only that, but when it happens, you will never forget it. It surprises me how many people have never had an experience whereby they've been so moved by a piece of art that they began to cry. And I've had many experiences like this. I just sunk in the snow a little bit. The snow has melted. But I can think of so many instances where I've been moved to tears by a work of art, namely a musical work. I can think of the first time I heard the slow movement from Mahler's Fifth Symphony. Oh, that did it. The Samuel Barber, Adagio for Strings. When I was working on the Schubert B-flat major piano sonata for my solo recital, when I was working on the Kinderszenen, or Scenes from Childhood, by Schumann for my master's recital. I could go on and on. The Siegfried Idyll by Wagner. Interestingly, those are all somewhat romantic in nature, and this is true. Also, slow movement of the Chopin B-minor Sonata. There's so many pieces that move me to tears, under the hands of skillful interpreters, of course, because it can be quite the opposite kind of tears when you hear these works played poorly. But when it comes to the music of Bach, I would say that it's not so much other people's performances, but my own. When I'm crying from Bach's music, it's usually when I'm playing, not when I'm listening to a recording. I just feel a very close connection to Bach's music. Wow, it's really muddy here. To go through life without being moved in a powerful way by art, a regular tragedy. It's like I'm controlling a ship that sets sail for some wondrous place where nobody can go but me. I've always had that feeling that playing the piano allowed me to escape. I've needed a lot of that lately, let me tell you, here with the events in Canada. Thankfully, those are being cleared up by the police. These are troubling times. And I have to spend so much time practicing these pieces. I wish I could just learn a piece in a day and then play it and then I would have so much more repertoire under my fingers. Take months to learn well, I find. A big part of practicing is daydreaming, you know. As pianists, we are interpreters of sound, and it's our job to communicate through the music to move someone. And that links up with what I was saying earlier about having experiences that do move you in a profound way. Maybe they don't make you cry. I'm kind of an emotional, not kind of, I'm an emotional person. I do get moved easily. Woo. Simple, sweet, honest, and beautiful things. I don't respond well to violence and vulgarity and rudeness and arrogance. It makes you feel that you've had a little taste of magic. Anyhow, these COVID numbers, the case numbers, seem to be going down, although I'm hearing of cases still, and I know they're out there. Got to be careful. In the center of the page, but there's much magic to be found in the margins. That's why I like wandering so much. Glenn Gould and his use of radio is a perfect example, and how he created radio documentaries using musical techniques. I also think of him too, you know, he gave up live concerts at a very young age in his early 30s, which was in the early 1960s. He gave up live concerts so that he could devote himself to the recording studio. It was just so comfortable being in front of a microphone. Often felt a connection with Glenn Gould and a lot of his views, but that was never one. It does kind of make me a little nervous when the microphone is there and, oh, I really gotta play perfectly. But I have to say that since the pandemic started and I finally got my grand piano shipped here to my home earlier this past summer and have been making these videos as a way of being heard, because there just have not been live recital performances. I am seeing what Glenn Gould meant, but in the way of YouTube. And I find that this medium I really like this medium. I can have at least I feel, I don't know what you think watching, but I feel it gives me a more personal, direct to listener experience with the people watching. And I feel like if there's anything I could leave people or leave the world after I die, I would rather it be a video like this that features me playing music that I love more than anything and that I've worked hard to learn and to perfect as best as possible, while also getting chatty. I'm not terribly funny. This is proving to be satisfying for me on a number of levels. Thanks for coming along with me on that ride. Let's take a look at some of these trees. Not all of them have signs. This one, red maple. I can't get much more Canadian than that. If this footage is a little shakier, it's because I've got a selfie stick. My gimbal is, I have issues with it. And, well, we won't go into that. Alright, here we have what is it called? A common hackberry tree. Poor little tree. It's like, couldn't you give me a better name? Common hackberry theme, East Central North America. As I say, I moved here 2 years ago, and these trees have grown. They've definitely grown a few feet. My parents have a huge oak tree in their front yard. This is a pin oak. So we've got oaks, maples, and here we have a white oak. Now these must be cedars, but my goodness, are they ever tall? My parents live in a cedar house. Isn't that a nice sky? Now this tree has no sign on it, but I just love these branches, and I could be wrong. I feel like the name tulip is somewhere in this tree. I know there's a tree in this park that has leaves that have a tulip kind of shape to them. It's very slushy. Steps. Here's a sign. Let's see what we got here. This is a Freeman's maple. So many more maples though up in northern Ontario. And I don't know what kind of tree this is. It's got some tattoos on it. There's a lot of peanut shells on the ground. We get quite a few squirrels here. And I love walking around this tree because every view you have is different. And use experiences like this, looking at trees and the variety of the shapes in the branches, to think about sound. Scotch pine is nice. If you're in the arts, you can get a lot of inspiration from nature. I remember hearing about how Vladimir Horowitz, the famous pianist, my teacher knew him quite well, preached going for a walk. It's like if you don't walk, you can't play. This is an eastern white pine. Hi there, it's me coming back one more time because I wanted to share a final little interesting bit of side information about this particular B-minor Prelude and Fugue by J.S. Bach from Book 1 of the Well-Tempered Clavier. It's the last one in Book 1. This is Prelude and Fugue number 24. It completes the first volume. And I came across this book. It's called The Interpretation of Bach's Keyboard Works, and it's by Erwin Bodky. And I think it was through my various rummaging and researching on Glenn Gould that I encountered a reference to this book. I'm not sure, but I think that's how I came upon it. And I have not read the whole thing, but I flipped through it based on some of the pieces I'm working on. And when I was doing so for this particular Prelude and Fugue, I found some interesting information. In the prelude, which you'll remember begins like this. This one sort of walking cautiously along life's path. That's the image I have. But I have here some things from the book and how B minor was regarded as Bach's favorite key. He also wrote in the key of B minor the overture in the French style and the B minor Mass. So according to Bodky, B minor was Bach's favorite key. And he says, Bodky does, that in this prelude at measure 24, we get a little moment that, in his words, gets exploited in measure 17 and 18 of the fugue. And that little moment also appears in the B minor fugue of volume 2 of the Well-Tempered Clavier. So that little moment at measure 24 sounds like this. It's very beautiful, kind of a weeping quality. Let me play it again. So the soprano, and then it goes on, and then the alto, and then this walking bass line together. So that little moment at measure 24 in the prelude of this B minor Prelude and Fugue volume 1 gets exploited, according to Erwin Bodky, over in the fugue, specifically measure 17 and 18. So we had our little, now becomes sequence there. So that's something that I came across in my research, Erwin Bodky and the exploitation of that little moment in the B-minor Prelude. This da-da-dee-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-da, this down, up, almost a weeping kind of quality. That's what I feel. And of course that sequence comes back quite a few times in the piece. For instance, measure 26. We get it, and then at 28 again, and then we get it one more time. It's such a long fugue. It's 6 pages, my goodness. At the end, 65, 66, 67, and 68. But it does sound like a little, I remember that moment from the prelude, you know. It's a little familiar moment. And Bodky says, in addition to that little moment in the prelude getting used in the fugue, it makes a return 22 years later at the end of volume 2 of the Well-Tempered Clavier in that particular B minor fugue. And that, of course, is fugue number 48. That one, in 3/8, B minor, again, Bach's favorite key, according to Bodky. And so that little moment makes a return in this fugue. And I think Bodky, I have in my notes here that Bodky calls it a kind of a musical hello from volume 1 to volume 2. Isn't that nice? So again, in volume 1, the first statement of it in the prelude, measure 24, not only comes back in the fugue of that prelude and fugue, volume 1, but also in the prelude of volume 2. So I'm playing it much slower than it goes, but you can hear the familiarity, I'm getting excited, the familiarity of this little motive. And in the prelude from volume 1, there's the different notes, but the overall da-da-da-dee-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-dum, it's so familiar. And I love that idea that Bach is, how does Bodky put it? Saying hello. Volume 1 is saying hello to volume 2. Let me get into it a little bit. In the volume 2 one, which is from 1744, volume 1 is from 1722. So 22 years apart, waving at one another, courtesy of Bach himself. I think that's just such a lovely thought to have in one's mind as one plays this piece and listens to it. Let me back up a little bit. Get it in the alto there versus the soprano in volume 1, but it's that same little motive returning in those 2 B minor preludes and fugues. So anyway, I hope you like that extra side little bit. And of course, well, we know Bach was a devout Lutheran, and in his words wrote his music for the glory of God. That apparently worked for him. It doesn't necessarily work for all of us. This is not why I play this music, but I think I know what Bach meant and wanted, and in this regard of having the experience of this music be almost transcendental, this impossibly out of reach, and yet striving to kind of escape the world through the music as a way of finding the sort of cosmic perfection of the stars. And that's how I feel this music, and why it is so intense when I get into it. It feels very intense to me anyway. Regardless of that, it's worth noting, as Bodky says in the book, that this subject of the B minor fugue that you heard in the video today, the B minor volume 1, has a weeping quality. These two-note slurs, and they're descending. I mean, they're going up over the long term, but the two-note slurs are descending, and he calls that a weeping subject. He says it's also in the Kyrie from Bach's B minor Mass, and reminiscent of the appoggiaturas in the Passions of Bach, in the arias from his Passions. And the other thing too, Bodky says that this subject has 21 notes in it, and that the subject contains the cross, in that this crossing of the half step and then coming up again, crossing it from the other direction and down again, is a musical kind of a cross. And of course that is very symbolic of Christ and the crucifixion. So some interesting thoughts, historically speaking. That doesn't impact how I play this. In fact, I prefer not to think of that when I'm playing this music. What I do think of is the tension between certain intervals, and this is a very long subject. It's also very chromatic. There's a D sharp, there's an E sharp, there's a G sharp. This is a very chromatic subject. So I'm listening for the tension between the intervals and the dissonance of the chromaticism, and the stretch of large intervals versus small ones too, and arrival points, going to those arrival points, going to the long notes and sort of pushing through the shorter notes, giving a little bit more depth as well to wide intervals, feeling a little bit of pulling back, and after you pull back, immediately push the tempo again. These are some of the things I'm listening for, but certainly it's quite interesting, these other dimensions that Bodky brings up. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon for more J.S. Bach, Mr. B, as I like to call him. Bye-bye.